Yes, your boy Crypto Blood, and welcome to another episode of My 2 Cents. This morning, we're looking at some geopolitical issues going on over in France. Brexit, you may have to move over. France looks like they may beat you to the punch. FREXIT may be on the verge of happening. We're going to take a look at that in a second. And also, the man who beat inflation dies at 92, Paul Volcker. And it's ironic because this kind of all relates, to be honest with you. All of these upheavals that are happening globally is of the result of low interest rates, cheap money. And that's what Paul Volcker was fighting against. Back in his day, he had interest rates sky high. People were fearful that they could never be able to own a home because the interest rates were so high. But he knew he had to do this to fight this inflation. And, you know, back then, at least the Fed were using real economic numbers to model and plot the real inflation. Nowadays, this CPI number that they use is totally made up and baloney, and it does not reflect real inflation. Inflation is running way higher than 2%, what the Fed is lying to us about. So we'll take a look at both of these in a second. But before we start, if you guys find these types of videos informative, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and click that bell to receive more videos like this. Before we get into things, let's take a look at the markets. Dow Jones ended down 0.38%, down 105 points, still near all-time highs. We could probably expect this gain to continue. But Paul Volcker passes away at 92 years old. The Carter-Reagan Fed chairman who beat inflation. It says out of CNBC, as the Fed chair under Presidents Carter and Reagan, Paul Volcker helped tame inflation, but with 20% interest rates that also crunched the economy. Volcker set the table for the long economic expansions that we saw in 1980s and through the 90s. Former St. Louis Fed President William Pohl said in a 2005 tribute, after the Great Recession, Volcker inspired a namesake regulation, the Volcker Rule, which sought to rein in commercial banks by prohibiting them from making risky investments in hedge funds and private equity firms. Volcker, who was chairman of the Federal Reserve under Presidents Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, helped tame inflation with a 22% interest rate that also crunched American manufacturing, farming, and real estate, but led the way to 2 decades of expansion. Paul Volcker was a giant among American public servants, Alliance President Thomas W. Ross said in a statement Monday. He was a man of great courage and integrity who committed most of his working life to the public good. He believed in the importance of an effective government to our democracy. He cared deeply about the future of America and those who serve in our government. Janet Yellen lies and says with this quote, Paul Volcker was an inspiration to me and to everyone in the Federal Reserve. If that was the case, Janet Yellen, you wouldn't have taken our wealth the way you did, driving us into lower interest rates and having the audacity to say that we would never see another economic recession in our lifetime. She went on to say he embodied the values we hold most dear: devotion to public service, the courage to do the right thing, even when it's immensely unpopular. Do you hear this? Doing the right thing, even when it's immensely unpopular. But because that's funny, because if I last remember, you did what was not immensely unpopular. You kicked the can, Mrs. Janet Yellen. What was unpopular would have been to start unloading your balance sheet over at the Federal Reserve and go ahead and just take the punch, take the bite now, so that we could have economic prosperity in the future like Paul Volcker did. That would have been the unpopular move, Janet Yellen. A lot of people would have been hurt in the short run, but in the long run, we may be in a better situation 10 years later after this financial crisis. The article goes on to say years after the Great Recession, Volcker headed Obama's Economic Recovery Advisory Board and pushed to create a namesake regulation, the Volcker Rule, which sought to rein in commercial banks by prohibiting them from making the risky investments that helped spark the 2007 financial crisis. Cigar smoking Volcker, who stood 6'7" and was known as Tall Paul, became Fed chairman under Carter in August of 1979 and was renominated by Reagan in 1983 and served until 1987. Even before his 1979 nomination, he had a reputation as an inflation buster. In In terms of economic stability in the future, Volcker said, that inflation is what is likely to give us the most problems and create the biggest recessions. The inflation rate was 1% under President Lyndon Johnson in 1965, but ballooned to a breaknecking 14.8% in March of 1980. To combat the price rises, Volcker's Fed jacked up the federal funds rate and tightened the money supply, the rate used by banks and credit unions for overnight loans to other depository institutions, which reached a record of 22.36% in July of 1981. And unfortunately, we can't do that now. It's too late. We're in a corner. Federal Reserve has painted us in a corner, again, because they would not do what was unpopular. So you have to just take whatever these figureheads say and just believe the opposite. That's like the rule of thumb. Just believe the absolute opposite of whatever they're blapping out of their mouths. The unpopular thing would have been to do TARP for sure. TARP was necessary to, because things would have definitely locked up. Do TARP as they did, 1 trillion injected. But after that, no QE, no QE2, no QE3, no QE4 where we are right now, no Operation Twist. No, that is can kicking and not facing the facts and doing what is in today's terms would be the most popular thing for the masses, so that they wouldn't feel the pain immediately. I personally liked a lot of what Paul Volcker did from a policy standpoint. He took the mandate of making sure wealth wasn't stolen in purchasing power seriously, and unfortunately that is not happening anymore. So this kind of segues us into the next article, which all of this is a symptom of. All of these riots that we see across the globe are symptoms of a problem, not the problem itself. FREXIT, it's France hurling towards leaving the EU. This article questions out of Zero Hedge, written by Martin Armstrong of ArmstrongEconomics.com. France is by no means calming down. He says there is a major underlying problem in France, which is rising to the surface in direct confrontation with the government and Macron's ambition to lead Europe. Macron's confrontation with Trump over NATO is a reflection of a historical posture of the French government that has resented both Germany and the United States. Macron has said the Atlantic Alliance can only be restored in one way, through restoring the unity of Europe. And again, you like him or not, Trump does not play. I don't think we would have seen any other president in our history call out Macron the way that President Trump did, as he should have been called out. Macron did not advocate that France should pull out of NATO, as was the case under President de Gaulle. Indeed, de Gaulle did withdraw France from NATO's military structure in 1966, yet it remained an ally. Macron has been also pushing for a European army. Clearly, Macron's agenda has been to federalize Europe, and that is clashing with the people. He is not a proponent in having the U.S. a major part of NATO, according to reliable sources. So if that's going to be the case, then France, you need to step up and pay more into NATO. Oh, but you can't, because you're pretty much bankrupt and you can't print your own money like the U.S. can. Macron has been pushing economic reforms to curtail the social benefits in France in his effort to federalize Europe. In protests of his planned reforms in the pension system, the unions have organized several general strikes, which are now being joined by the Yellow Vests. This has resulted in bringing in hundreds of thousands of protesters to the streets. The problem that Macron faces is that France's economic performance can no longer finance the generous welfare state, which is far beyond international standards. It goes on to say that everything points to a major political crisis brewing in France, and there's talk that perhaps France should also now move to exit the EU. FREXIT, according to Harris Interactive poll taken 26th and 28th of November of 2019, Macron has a favorable rating of only 39% and a disapproval rating of 61%. His push to federalize Europe may be his undoing. Macron admitted in January 2018 that if the French people were given a right to vote of FREXIT, a simple yes or no response to such a complex question, the French would probably have voted for FREXIT. This is no question that there remains a serious risk that FREXIT can also be on the horizon. for the driving force is the collapsing economic structure of socialism. American politicians will one day face the very same crisis. All the promises of benefits are coming to an end. It's very true. This is very true, and I hope you guys check out the interview I did on pensions and the promises that this country, America that is, won't be able to deliver on with Ted Seidel. He's a whistleblower that actually exposed JP Morgan and won against the CFTC as well, the SEC, in a total of $78 million in winnings from both of his cases, the biggest whistleblower to date. And it's all about pensions, all about pensions. So in addition to that, just last week we saw French farmers taking to the streets to save their fields. It says traffic in Paris was held up by tractors driven by farmers protesting poor revenues and unfair professional conditions. Look at this, people. It says that the French capital had approximately 200 farmers who came from all over France to protest unfair competition and crippling taxes. Some were bused to Paris by their local unions, arriving at 6 a.m. to start the protest, but were suddenly joined by more than 1,000 others who drove their tractors up to Paris. So this is just letting you know, guys. I mean, this is not anything to be playing with. People over there are fed up, and it's only a matter of time, as the Zero Hedge article speaks about, only a matter of time before Americans finally realize that they should be fed up. We haven't hit that point yet here in America, but definitely EU is out of control. Negative interest rates. This stuff is crumbling. You know, brace yourself. If you're in America, you have an opportunity to look outside and see the chaos ensuing. So you can prepare. You're in a better position than, say, some of these other countries that are already hitting a crescendo in this chaos. But hey, that's my 2 cents. If you found this video informative, make sure you guys like, share, and subscribe, and click that bell to receive more videos like this on a daily basis. I'm out of here, people. How?